Hello and welcome to the show. For this week's Canyon Rally, we start with one of the fastest cars, sort of fastest official cars for BeamNG Drive. That is a twin-turbo SBR4, four-wheel drive, road-going supercar. So, plenty of speed going to be in this vehicle. In fact, so much speed I may have got it teensy little bit caught out as we come towards the crest at turn 1, over 100 miles an hour up here, and that is too much speed for the car. You just can't quite make that turn and survive, certainly not at that angle, as we ended up slightly in the bank. Amazingly, the car does still kind of work. It turns to the right okay, but steering to the left did not really function as hoped there. So next run, we're going to have to be a little bit careful, a little bit of a lift, a small brake across the crest. It was better, still didn't quite work. After all, you know, this is very much your more normal road-going supercar, and they're not quite designed to deal with that heavier a landing. That is quite high speed, and that is a pretty large amount of force going through the suspension. It just bounces the car back up into the air, and then you're in trouble. Now, while I did say that this was four-wheel drive, things can still go quite easily wrong when you have this much power. I was frantically trying to get the car back onto the road when I realised I was running wide out the hairpin. It's very easy to fall off the mountain, and then we went for a spin. Rather unspectacular, but that was made up for by the next crash, as again I get a small bounce, this time firing the car sideways, and we go for a very violent roll as we go heading off down the side of the canyon once more. I think that might be the most violent roll we've had from any vehicle. It was just, yeah, too much speed basically over that first crest. Now, the other kind of problem area, not so much for the landing though. This first sort of crash at that section was a little bit of an unfortunate landing, but the bigger issue that would occur there was locking the brakes just before leaving the jump. And as you lock the brakes, the car would be tipped ever so slightly sideways. I tried to catch it this time, and it doesn't work. I try to catch it, I get a twitch, I bounce it off the wall. I mean, the car does eventually come sort of back, pointing the right direction, but the run's already ruined. Relatively tame accident for that part of the course, most definitely. Normally you have very, very big shunts down there. While I was trying to do a better job of getting this turn 1 sorted, it didn't always work. Again, it's the locking up of the brakes. It's very hard to kind of get them unlocked, and normally once they've sort of locked initially, that's it for this car. Even if you do get them unlocked, you're probably going to get a big twitch, and you're probably going to have a big accident. The off-road section was proving interesting. That was more of a slightly losing control on the way into that tiny dirt section and ending up climbing the mountain. Amazingly, the car came out in relatively good shape from all of that, but more brake troubles on the next run. You see, as I get it locked up, it just pulls the car to the left, which puts us out of position for the landing, which means we skid down the road on our roof, do a little dance, and then are still stuck on the roof. I mean, the car is actually in relatively good condition from skidding down the road on its roof, but it doesn't really want to be on the roof. The road suspension, not quite liking that dirt section. I was a little too far to the right, just clipped the hillside, and that upset the car. It started bouncing around on the suspension, and then you're not going to be able to keep it under control, especially when you're trying to accelerate through that part to make the most of the vehicle's speed. I love how the wheel is just merrily bouncing its way down the mountainside. There's a rather different looking car after that crash. It is yeah, pretty wrecked. Amazingly, the engine actually survived all of that. I managed to tear off the rear bumper on a barrier. However, it's a high-speed section that would prove equally scary. Not so much for the massive accidents, but very easy to spin the car through here. It is a little bit on the bumpy side through a couple of sections, and this car is travelling very fast and quite easy to get things wrong. Once more though, it is a lock of the brakes coming across that bridge jump that would have a spectacular outcome actually. Often if I was locking the brakes and finding myself out of position there, you didn't quite go for that many rolls, but there we go. It took some time to get the hang of this car, probably the longest of all of the vehicles that I've driven down here so far. the speed is ferocious. It is a very, very quick car, and it is very, very unforgiving. If things go slightly wrong because of all of that speed, chances are you're going to have a really big accident, and the brakes being so incredibly easy to lock up was a little bit of a fiddle to get used to. Once you have got used to it, though, it's not too bad. The brakes are very powerful on this car. After all, you could actually take a relatively decent amount of speed across this jump, and surprisingly, the bridge dump, like the actual landing bit, wasn't too bad after having all of the issues at turn 1. I thought we may have more problems on that landing, you know, again, for being a road-going supercar. However, it actually managed very, very well in that landing zone. Even if you were going faster and you actually smacked the nose on the ground or whatever, the car could deal with it quite well. Across the dirt section, I had to be patient and waiting to get on the power, although, of course, once I can get on the power, we fire it up towards 100 miles an hour again before slowing down for the hairpin, making sure not to get on the power too soon. We do run a couple of wheels on the dirt, but it's not quite running the risk of falling off the side of the mountain, and then we blast towards these final fast corners. Again, we're going to have to go on the brakes through this section. We simply can't carry the speed around here, especially not with the bumps, but there is plenty of acceleration to be had once we're out of the corner. So again, it's back onto full throttle as we fly up towards the line, and it is across the finish for the SBR4. Tried my very best to keep it under control, but it couldn't quite get it slowed down. I was having issues with reverse a little bit. I think we got it caught on a rock ever so slightly. Do manage to get the vehicle free, though. Again, we've lost. The front and rear bumper fell off quite easily on this car. If you ever get to clip something, and they would, fall off very quickly. A monumentally fast vehicle. Difficult to drive, though, most definitely. Often getting the brakes locked up was the biggest concern. Up next, we've gone from one of the fastest to one of the slower vehicles. This is the Burnside. I've gone for the Sled variant. So this is kind of like a lowered, almost slammed classic American vehicle. And I was kind of curious to see how this very, very low, very old car would fare on a course like this. Now, it doesn't have the same power as the SBR4. It's also, I suspect, going to be very, very heavy. It's not the quickest accelerating. We're struggling to get 60 miles an hour as we hit the crest at turn 1. Now, I was worried about the brakes in this car. It turns out it actually wasn't too bad getting slowed. I thought they might be absolutely awful and we'd have real trouble slowing the car down into any of these corners, but that wasn't actually quite the case. It was helped, admittedly, by the car just not being very fast into the turns. I got a fair way down on the first run, but turning a little bit too soon around the pond corner, and I would get myself into trouble just bouncing across the dirt and find myself in a crash barrier, and that would be, well, that would be that for the lead sled. Coming across this jump down here wasn't really a problem. I could be flat out, and the car, it was just about sort of the balance. It was just about the right speed, really, for the landing, although getting it slowed down for this next turn is always the tricky bit, because if you do get the jump right, you carry a lot of momentum, especially going downhill in a very bumpy braking zone, and I was too late on the brakes and the car ended up in the pond. I managed to somehow snap the bonnet so that it was sticking up for the majority of this run. I was kind of hoping I would actually make it on this attempt, just to have driven most of it with the bonnet open. Unfortunately, bouncing around through the high-speed final corners would fire the Burnside off into the trees. This car, though, really didn't take too much time to get down this course. The fact that it was incredibly low to the ground didn't really cause any problems to the vehicle whatsoever. We weren't going fast enough to get airtime over the crest at turn 1, and as I said, the brakes weren't actually too bad. It was quite consistent with them, and I didn't really have any huge lockups with this car as I had been having with the SBR4. It just wasn't a thing that happened as much. Now, through these next couple of corners, there isn't quite the grip. I can't really carry the speed that I ideally want to, but no major problems. Then it is flat out up towards this jump. We leave it at just about the perfect speed. We get a lovely landing. It's up to 76 miles an hour. Not bad going for this car. Frantically get on the brakes to try and slow it down. up towards this quite nasty hairpin. The car itself, it could be a little oversteery if you jumped on the power too soon, or if you're giving it too much sort of steering input and tried to go to full throttle. You could potentially get in a little bit of trouble with oversteer, but nothing too bad, and it's easily flat out through the dirt section. Again, caused absolutely no issues. The landing of the big jump across the dirt, no problems for this classic vehicle that is almost scraping the floor at places. So yeah, it really didn't have any of the issues that I thought that it might. A big slide out of the heaven. That's about as much of a slide, certainly, as I'm going to get away with on Beam without having a rather large accident. I feared that it was going to go round or snap on me at that point, but we got away with it. It's up to 87 miles an hour as we come into these S's. Now, we can actually get away with bouncing along the bumps a little bit more with this car. It is forgiving enough to actually ride that section of track. Quite surprising, and we are going to be flat out here all the way down towards the line as it goes. 83 miles an hour. We didn't crack 100 with with this car, but there we go. It was at least nicely controlled back down to a halt. Unfortunately, I don't think there was a manual option for this car. I ended up running with the automatic gearbox anyway. I'm pretty sure I checked, but yeah, it did better than I thought it would, honestly. I thought we would have some issues with that car, but that was not the case. And finally, we have got a derby bus, the Bluebird, the classic kind of American school bus vehicle that, yeah, I was going to take down this road. Now, as I went for the derby configuration, if you like, here I have the most powerful of the engine options. The interior is all stripped out, hopefully saving some weight, so you know, it's going to be about as quick as you're going to really get a bus. The bigger questions were more, would the brakes be good enough to slow it down? Would it be quite top heavy? Would it fall over very, very easily? Well, we weren't going quick enough, again, much like the lead sled, we weren't going quick enough to get any airtime over the crest at turn 1. And amazingly, the brakes on this thing are absolutely incredible. I got on the brakes, you know, relatively early, thinking we were going to have massive issues, and that really wasn't the case. This thing gets stopped so incredibly well. In fact, it handles not quite as I was expecting, and that got me into a little bit of trouble early on. I was not quite expecting it to have the turn in that it did. It was actually a little bit oversteery in places as well, and yeah, as I was expecting to have to fight it more through the hairpin, I ended up turning too much, and that ended up having me climb a mountain, and well, that didn't go well as it tumbled its way back down. The jump, well, was this wasn't quite going as quick as the lead sled, and that meant that the landing was perhaps a little bit more awkward sometimes. This one, it kind of rattled about on the landing. It was more getting it slowed to the hairpin section that got the bus into trouble. Now, the vehicle is still working here. I wondered if I could pull it out. Unfortunately, I'd managed to sort of get myself stuck through a sign, and then in trying to reverse, we got caught and made everything about 10 times worse down there. That's yeah, not been helpful. Not being helpful at all. We've managed to end up missing the rear door on this particular attempt. As I said, it was a surprisingly oversteery vehicle. I got a little bit caught out by the back end letting go, and as I tried to get it all back under control at one of the fastest sections on the track. If you're going to have a twitchy accident, well, that's possibly one of the places where it is likely to happen. It's not so much that, you know, it's terribly twitchy. I've driven a lot worse vehicles. It's that you're just not expecting the bus to have quite as much turn in, or perhaps quite as much oversteer as it actually does. Again, the landing of the jump, I got quite nicely this time around, but was carrying a lot more momentum than I was expecting, and that got me into some trouble trying to slow it down into the next corner. Once more, the bus was still working, but kind of wedged on the concrete barriers. And if things were going wrong for the bus, it was pretty much happening around about here. I end up a little bit twisted on the takeoff. Not a good. You want to really be taking that jump straight. Otherwise, well, this is the sort of thing that can happen, really. Yeah, not the greatest. Again, fighting with the vehicle after bouncing around on the landing. Amazingly, though, the bus really wasn't too bad when it comes to driving down this course. You know, I really thought this was going to be absolutely ridiculous, you know, bordering on the undrivable, silly, this kind of stuff. Or I thought it could potentially be like that because, you know, you've got relatively quick bus here going down. Rather interesting rally stage, but truth be told, the brakes were really very, very good. Even if you had a lockup in this, it still got slowed down plenty well enough, and it didn't get all unhappy like the SBR4 did, which meant that you could get it slowed for some of these tighter corners very, very well. And then through the turns, you could really chuck the bus around. You could really throw it through these corners, and it had plenty of turn in the back end, would slide about a little bit, but it wasn't too bad at all. I could manage it quite well, which made it really rather good fun to drive. We get a little bit more speed coming across the jump there, so we get a neater landing. Now, this section here was always likely to be where the bus is going to lose sizable amounts of time. After all, it is a very, very large vehicle, so even with the good turning, you've still got to manage to find a way of getting it through this pond hairpin, but it does make it around the turn quite nicely. The dirt section, absolutely no problem for the vehicle as we fire it down towards the hairpin. 75 miles an hour achieved by a bus is not bad going. It's not quite the 100 plus that we got from the first car, but for a bus I think that's not too bad in the way of speed. Running a little bit wide out of the hairpin, but again we are able to get away with it as we now fly down towards these fast S's. Now, this was a little bit more of a terrifying prospect as it's up to 93 miles an hour. I tip it into the first part, flat out through there, and we can kind of almost slide our way through this section. It is mostly flat out down here, and I was not expecting the bus to quite be able to handle that section with that much speed, but there we are as we come across the line. And, yeah, we end up throwing it a little bit into the ditch. I wonder if I could kind of sort it out and straighten it up. The answer was no. By the time I figured that out, it was a little bit too late. And then we might have got it slightly beached, just trying to turn it around. Turns out it's quite difficult to turn one of these buses around in such a narrow area, and I can't recover it from there, so we're going to have to go forward. My grand plan was to try and use the momentum from going downhill here. Well, not that there was a huge amount, but use some of the momentum to climb back out this side, and that didn't quite work. So, yeah, the bus is going to have to be left down here. It was surprisingly good fun to drive. It really was. On to the times, and we do indeed have a new leader. The SBR4 will go to the top of the table. Perhaps not a massive surprise with that one. It isn't massively faster though than the ETK 800. You know, they're pretty damn close in terms of rally time. Now, further down, we will find the other two vehicles. The lead sled goes into 8th place, 158.3, a few seconds down on the Ford LTD. It lacks power. Is the main problem really with that. It's just not massively quick. It dealt with the course though relatively well. The Bluebird is down at the bottom at 203.7 for the bus. Surprisingly good fun to drive. I mean, it's still a horrendously impractical vehicle for this kind of thing. However, yeah, it's surprisingly entertaining fun to drive. It could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot more difficult to try and drive a school bus down that or a derby bus in the cases of what we kind of had down that rally course. But yeah, that is going to be it for this video, guys. As ever, I will put links to all of the mods that I have used in the description, so you can download them and have a go with them yourself. Someone has made a proper beam scenario for this rally course. Now, personally, I'm not going to be using it for these videos because I don't want it flashing up the time that the vehicle has done when I have completed a run. However, if you guys at home do want to have a go with this course, I highly recommend you do download it and you can have a play around with it, see if you can beat my times and so on. I'll put a link to that in the description as well, so you can play around with it yourself. However, that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.